15 years ago, on a beautiful blue sky day, the world, as we Americans had known it, crashed down with the Twin Towers. It seems like a long time ago. It also seems like just yesterday. We know where we were probably when we learned the news or felt the shudder of the crash. We may remember scrambling to find our loved ones or scrambling away from debris. We can still see in our mind's eyes those posters, those fluttering homemade posters, faces of the missing who we didn't yet understand could never be found. Our memories are so vivid, it seems like yesterday. But 15 years is a long time, too. The difference between being 64 years old and 79, between being 46 and 61, between, for some of you, being 3 and 18. Who has died during these 15 years or been born into your life? Has your job changed, or your home, or your health, or your finances? For most of us, much has changed in 15 years, as it has for our country and our world. This 15th anniversary of 9/11 offers an opportunity, a natural one, to pause and to take stock. I resist that, I know. Reviewing the last 15 years makes me acknowledge the time that I'm not going to get back, makes me think about my finitude, but I still think it's important to take stock while each of us still can. A chance to confess and to change that we still have for some time longer. You see, we're trying to figure out what matters, what in the end gives our own lives meaning and the lives of others. Life is the gift of time enough to love. I've been thinking about this because of the funerals upcoming soon in this sanctuary, 3 in the next few weeks. Next Sunday for Polly Guth, a day later for Francis Burke, in 6 weeks for George Sprague. What will matter most as their eulogies are given? And as I meet with the families, I always find that it will be the good that these people have done. If they were loving to their children or spouse or friends, if they were ethical and fair, if they were generous, shared what they had, if they made a difference for others with their time and resources, stood for those who were the pariahs. Titles and offices held will become almost a footnote. Degrees earned or not may be noted, but then moved past. But mourners will lean forward in these very pews where you're sitting for stories about how each handled adversity or crushing pain. Did they forgive others and let them begin anew? Did they reach out beyond themselves to help someone? How often? What did they ask of leaders and of our government? And as the mourners listen, each will be taking stock of his or her own life. Life is the gift of time enough to love. So on this anniversary of 9/11, we take stock. What does matter in the end? Is there some force in this universe calling us to a higher way of living and treating one another? Is love really stronger than hate? When you step back, of what are you most proud in the last 15 years as an individual or for us as a nation? Here's my sense. The best things that have happened in the last 15 years all involve the raising up of people who had been most vulnerable. You know that it's been since 2001 that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett have given away $40 billion, much of it to the poorest continent, Africa. They've declared really a remarkable set of principles that guide their actions, the belief that all lives are equal. Everyone deserves education and healthcare as a right. Each person, regardless of circumstances, should be able to reach their fullest potential. And the results of their generosity and of American funds allocated by President George W. Bush to AIDS is this. Since 2001, HIV has declined across the globe by 40%. 17 million people worldwide are receiving antiretroviral treatment. Remember when it was just a handful here in the US? Ebola has been contained, polio is nearly eradicated, and due to advances in technology, access to the internet has increased in this 15 years from 8% of the globe to 50% today. Nearly a third of the world has a smartphone, and I know for some of you that may give mixed signals, but what it does is enable communication and also great learning for vast swaths of people who are isolated and deprived of all that knowledge available at their fingertips. With these health advances and that spread of technology, did you know that incomes have actually risen worldwide? I didn't know it. In 2001, 30% of the whole world were in that category we call the poorest, just making $2 a day or less to live on. And now, we are down to 15% of them that are that poor. Those considered middle income earn $10 to $20 a day now. That number has doubled. Meanwhile, in our country, more barriers to discrimination have fallen in the last 15 years. We elected the first Black president. We appointed the first Hispanic woman to the Supreme Court. We've approved gay marriage. And this week, the first Muslim federal judge was nominated. All advances for those who had less. And you know the moments that inspired me most? It was all those who ran toward the Twin Towers and toward the marathon bombs in order to help. It's also all of those of you who I know personally who have been present much more quietly, not in a headline, often unseen, steadfast with those who've been struggling with illness or death. But we've had darker scenes too, haven't we, since 2001? These are the ones to confess. As in our psalm today, my sins are ever before me. The 10 hottest years on record, and we who have much are loath to give up the ways we've known. Mass gun violence, apparently accepted now as part of American life. Another slaughter every 6 months or so appears to be the necessary cost of a free society under the Second Amendment. Really? The recovery from our economic collapse in 2007 was uneven, leaving behind the least educated, the youngest, the oldest workers, and many of us were unaware until their fury drove our election primaries. How could we not have known? We've also been blind to the inequality of our justice system, rendered apparent only when unequivocal videos of unarmed blacks shot by police cross our screens. And we collectively shrug as income inequality has soared in our public school struggle. But the most important issue of which we must take stock today is our country's choice to respond to the 9/11 violence inflicted on us with our own massive violence, as if eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth makes sense. We did it largely against the wrong target with an inadequate follow-up plan for those countries' futures, so we're complicit in an ever greater blind and toothless world. What were our best options? I don't know that we're safer now. Our war response and rhetoric created new enemies who didn't exist before, and our polarized political environment precludes really rational discussion about what we do now. Steve Brill, who wrote in The Atlantic this summer, since 9/11, it's off limits to even ask if the US would be better off with half the number of marshals on planes or more dollars spent on lead removal or early childhood education. And then there are these facts. The costs of our longest continuous war, calculated by the Center at Brown University, 6,800 American soldiers died since 9/11. 7,000 US contractors died. 210,000 civilians died in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iraq. Far more, some say 1 million, have died of malnutrition and the destruction that takes place in a country of their health system and their environment. And this week, UNICEF reported 50 million children have migrated across borders suffering tremendous trauma from war and poverty and climate change, children who the UNICEF reminds us don't bear any responsibility for the bombs and bullets, the gang violence and persecution, the shriveled crops, or the low family wages that drive them from their homes. And of course, the trauma of war is here too. For our soldiers who have returned stateside since 2001, nearly 1 million veterans willing to die for us have filed disability claims. Their suicide rate is higher than for civilians. The primary cost of caring for them really is borne on their families, often their spouses. Child abuse among military families is 3 times higher in homes where a parent has been deployed. This summer, Sebastian Younger caught our attention with his new book, Tribe, and his thesis that in combat, soldiers ignore the differences of race and religion and politics within their platoon. They are all one tribe. But then they return to the United States and they find us here, a people who speak with incredible contempt about, depending on which side you're on, the rich or the poor, the educated or the foreign-born, the president or the whole government. Anthropologists, according to Younger, tell us that there are 3 things that soldiers need to be successfully reintegrated. They have to come back to a society that's reasonably equal with decent economic opportunities, a society that understands what it's like to have been a soldier, and a society where they feel needed and productive again as they had been on the battlefield, which means that of all the countries on earth for a soldier to come home to, the United States is now among the worst. Our veterans re-enter an unstable working class. Their experience of war isn't equally shared and understood. And because jobs for these vets seem scarce, we don't convey that they are still important to us. Soldiers go from a world in which they're united and interconnected and indispensable to one where we isolate them and bombard them with images of politicians, civilians screaming at each other on TV, inequality, war trauma, divisions of race and class and religion. Vets no longer get to be in those united tribes. Although they were willing to die for their country, is there a tribe worth living for? Some of them wonder. Tomorrow on Boston Common, I will join other clergy of every faith in Boston who have been meeting through this summer and trying to take stock. We've concluded that we don't want our own decisions or those of our government made based on what's easiest and what whips up the crowds, what is spawned from fear or partisan wrangling from those tribal divisions. Rather, we're going to be asking that decisions by our leaders be made on our higher moral values that recognize our whole nation, our whole world now as one tribe. It's been called Moral Monday because all our faith traditions teach that we can reach higher. We are being urged to be people who are more kind and filled with greater compassion. It turns out there are going to be 25 of these Moral Mondays taking place tomorrow in 25 different state capitals. They've sprung up unexpectedly, and they're being led by Muslim imams and Jewish rabbis and Christian clergy, and those who believe their faith calls us to take stands, not in a partisan way, in a way that shows how we live and treat one another matters. We hope that in time for Moral Mondays, the crowds will grow, focused on the least and lost. And so I have hope. With each time of taking stock comes a chance for change, for open and honest confession, confronting where we've gone off the rails and finding forgiveness and new life, changing our ways. Every scripture we read today affirmed that. The writer from 1 Timothy marvels that God can still use him, though he was a man of violence. Grace overflowed, he said. I received mercy so that others might see that they can begin afresh too. In our passage about Moses, God is reportedly furious with the Hebrews who worship that golden calf, an idol. But in God's mercy, at the end, the idol is destroyed, but not the whole nation. And in Psalm 51, King David admits with full honesty, I have sinned, I have done evil. Your judgment against me is justified. And with that confession, healing can begin. Oh God, in your mercy, he says, purge me, cleanse me. I know you can. You can make me whiter than snow. Your forgiveness is my hope. May I walk again with you, oh God, walk humbly with my God. And God says, yes, my child. In this anniversary week of 9/11, some of the youngest among us are also taking stock because, of course, it's their world too. Kira is a 15-year-old born just as 9/11 was happening. Her family lived in New York City then. Now they're in Columbus, Ohio. Kira was interviewed on NPR this week with two other teens, and they were asked, what is the legacy of 9/11? And with the wisdom of youth, she said this, I think the ultimate legacy for our generation is that the world we know is a different place. We have no false sense of security. We know that not everyone is going to get along, but we need to get past that. Because as much as we distrust each other, we are the only ways we're going to survive. We're all connected. We know that, my generation. And so we have to be together and we have to help one another, because if we're all connected, if someone hurts one of us, they hurt all of us. Isn't she saying that our tribe is now the whole world? Remember the good that can be done. Remember that philosophy of the Gates Foundation, that they see every person as equal, as one tribe, as deserving to live to their fullest potential. Then look at the good we humans can do. God of grace and God of glory, on thy people pour thy power. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage for the facing of this hour. Amen.